Hi, welcome to the loop session of the Handpower PHP training video. In the previous video, we discussed the conditional statements in PHP. We learned about the if statement, the if-else statement, the if-else-if statement, and also the switch statement. Now, let's take a look at how to use loops in PHP. In PHP, loops are used to execute the same block of code for a specific number of times. In PHP, we have the following loop statements. We have the while loops, we have the do while loops, we have the for loop, and we also have the for each loops. Let's take a look at them one after the other. The while loop is used to execute a block of code as long as the specified condition is true. Let's look at the while loop syntax. We will have the while. In between the brackets, we will have the condition we want to check against. And in between these two curly braces will be the code to execute. For the while loop, the code to execute will only get executed if the condition stated here evaluates to true. Now, let's take a look at an example. I'll declare variable x to be equals to 1. In my while loop, while variable x is less than 10, I want it to execute this. So, in this example, I declared variable s to be equals to 1. Then using my while loop, while s is still less than 10, I want it to continue to print the number of x to the browser. Then I decide to increment the value of x. Let's save and then view our results in the browser. You can see in the browser that it will continue to print the value of s as long as the incremented value of s is still less than 10, which is what we have in the browser. Now, let's take a look at the do while loop. The do while loop in PHP will execute a block of code once and then check the condition before repeating the loop while the specific condition is still true. Let's take a look at its syntax. we will have the do. Then in between the curly braces is the code we want it to execute once first. Then the while, which will check against the condition before the execution continues. Now let's look at another example. For the do while loop, the block of code in between these first coiling braces will be executed first before it checks against the conditions stated in the while loop. Let's save and take a look at what we have in the web browser. Now let's refresh. We still have our numbers listed from 1 to 9. The difference between a while loop and a do while loop is that the do while loop execution will happen first before it checks against the condition. Let's modify our code to really understand what I'm saying. Now let's save and then view the results in the browser. We can now see that the only result we have here is 6 printed out. Let's go back to our code. When I declared variable s as 6, the do while loop will execute this block of code first. That is, the number is x will be printed out on the screen. That is what yielded the result we have in the browser. Then after that is printed at least once, then it will now start checking against this condition. S is 6, x was printed to the screen, then the value of x, 6, is 6 less than 5, which is false, then the execution stops. That is how the do while loop works. Now let's take a look at the for loops. For loops in PHP are used to run a script for a specific number of time. This means that for loop is used when you know the number of time a script is to run. Let's take a look at the syntax. We'll have our for, we'll open our brackets, then we'll have our initial, then we'll have test counter, and then we'll increment or decrement. Then we'll have our block of codes. For the for loop, the syntax for a for loop is to initialize the variable you want to test against. You initialize it inside the brackets, and then you set the test counter for that variable, and also you can decide to increment or decrement the variable. Let's take a look at an example. In this example, let's assume I want to print out welcome for a certain number of time to the web browser. For my test counter, it's going to be the number of time I want to test I against. I want it to print 5 times. And then my block of code will be now. Let's save our changes and then view the results on the web browser. From the results on the web browser, we can see that we have printed out welcome 5 times. This is how to print out a block of code a certain number of time in PHP using the for loop. Now, let's discuss functions in PHP. A function in PHP is a block of statements that can be used repeatedly in a program. Unlike the earlier codes we've been writing, a function is not executed immediately when a page is loaded. Rather, a function will be executed only by a call to the function. Let's take a look at the syntax and examples to understand function. To define a function in PHP, we will use the keyword function and then the name of the function. Then we'll open our brackets and then the curly braces. The block of code we want to execute inside this function will be stated in between the curly braces. Let's note that in PHP, a function name cannot start with a number. It can either start with a letter or an underscore. Let's take a look at an example. In this example, we'll create a function that will greet a user. Let's call the function greeting. What we want to execute inside the function is a message that will actually greet the user good morning. Now, the block of code above is a function declaration. To really execute this function, we now need to make a function call. To make a function call, we will call the function name greeting and then open a bracket and then close the bracket, and this will make the call to this function. And once the call to this function is made, the block of code inside the curly braces will be executed. Let's save and look at our changes in the browser. Now let's refresh our browser. The message displayed by the function call is good morning, And that's how function works in PHP. Now, let's talk about passing arguments to a function. From my greeting function, assuming I want to pass the greeting to a particular person, I can only achieve this by passing an argument to the function. For example, I want to greet a particular person. Then I'll need to pass an argument to my function. The argument would help pass the data into the block of code inside my function. Let's take a look at the argument example. Let's take a look at an example by passing arguments to the function we have. Now, I'm passing the name of the person I'm actually greeting. Let's save and then go to the browser. Let's refresh. From the result displayed in the browser, we can see that the name, which is the argument I actually passed to the function, was passed along to the block of code inside the function. This is exactly how to pass arguments in functions. Now, let's talk about a function returning a value. For functions to return a value, we will need to use the return keyword. Let's take a look at an example. I'll remove the echo here and do return. By adding the return keyword, now I can use this function as a variable or pass the function into my echo statement here. Now let's save and then go to our browser to view our changes. We can now see in our browser that the needed result was actually displayed. We can see on the browser that the needed result was displayed. Now, let's go ahead and talk about arrays in PHP. Arrays in PHP are used to store multiple data into a single variable. Let's take a look at an example. I'll declare a variable fruit. In this example, we are storing multiple fruits into the variable fruit, array index can be used to access the value inside an array. An array indices starts from 0. Let's save and take a look at the results in our browser. Array index 0 is banana, which is what we have on the screen. Let's modify our code to print out array index of 2, which is going to be carrot. Let's save and take a look at our changes. We can now see carrots on the web browser. Now, let's take a look at the code. To declare an array in PHP, we will need to use the array keyword. Then open our braces. For each element we are adding into the array, we would use a comma to separate them. Now, there are two ways to access an element in an array. We can use the array index, which was what we saw in the example we gave earlier. Or secondly, we can use the name key. The name key only works for PHP associative array, which we will see later on in the course of this video. Now, let's take a look at associative array. In the examples given here, I'm using the associative array method to denote the number of bananas we have in the fruits array. Likewise, the number of orange we have in the fruits array, same as the number of carrots we have in the fruits array. Now, to print out the number of banana we have in the fruit array, I can use the associative key. I can use the name key to access the number of banana in the fruit array. Let's save and then view our changes in the browser. On the browser, we can see that the number of bananas printed out on the browser is 2. In this session of the video, we've talked about arrays, for loops, switch statements, and many more. Now, let's dive into the web concept of PHP and how forms are being used to handle serving dynamic content in PHP.